You know, at the end of the day, when you look over at your classroom library and it's a hot mess, how frustrating is that? We have all asked the question at some point in our teaching careers, how do you organize your classroom library so it will actually stay organized? Honestly, it's not always a one and done situation. We may have to organize our classroom library differently depending on the grade level we're teaching, or goals for our students, the skills we want them to learn, and more. In fact, there are so many ways to organize your classroom library that it can get confusing and overwhelming. So if you're pondering reorganizing your classroom library, setting up a classroom library for the first time, or just want to be able to use and manage your classroom library better, this episode is for you. I'm Lisa Burns, a teacher success coach, veteran elementary teacher, and mom of 5, and this is the Teach Joyfully podcast. Thanks for joining me today. Are you missing out? Team H.O.P.E Insiders get extra encouragement, tips and tricks, surprise freebies, and more. Become a H.O.P.E Insider today and get access to all kinds of freebies at www.hopeineducation.com/vault. Classroom library organization is more than just cute labels and how to group and store your books. Sometimes I think teachers get caught up in sorting, cataloging, and creating organization for all the books. All the while, the other pieces that go with managing a fully functional classroom library effectively and efficiently get forgotten or given little attention. And that, my friend, is a huge mistake. While the type of book bin you use for your classroom library can be important, we'll go way beyond those kinds of basics to help you confidently make decisions about all areas of your classroom library organization. Let's get started. So what we really want with our classroom library organization is how to make your library almost self-managed, and the key to this is systems and organization. Let's start with student buy-in. Students need to take some form of ownership for a classroom library in order for it to really function properly. Because let's face it, they are the users of the classroom library. If they aren't buying in, then it's going to be a hot mess. So I'm talking about things like taking time to discuss or brainstorm how a neat classroom library helps all of us in the classroom. What's its purpose and what's the function of the classroom library? Students need to understand this even in the primary level. I also think that adding in a classroom job of librarian, whether you assign that to one student or 2 students at a time, and then training students how to contribute really helps the classroom library function better, provided we give the right kind of training. So this would include helping your students understand that all of their actions in that classroom library have consequences. They either help the classroom libraries do their job better, or they hinder the classroom librarians from doing their job well. So this piece is we all have a buy-in and a piece that we need to do on a regular basis in addition to the classroom librarian job. When we have a classroom librarian job and we don't explain all of this to students, I think sometimes students feel like the classroom librarians will take care of everything, and so they don't have to put things back neatly. They don't have to treat things the way that you want them to treat things because they have someone to clean up after them, and that's not the job of the classroom librarian. So we need to make sure that everybody understands that and understands that they have a piece of this as well. And part of that piece is how the students need to handle the books and the book bins from selection to reading to returning books. And so training students in all those systems helps make the classroom librarian's job easier, but it also makes up for just a better functioning library. I don't know about you, but I need easy classroom library systems that my students and I will actually adhere to for my library to not drive me completely crazy. Complicated rarely works in a busy classroom. The more complicated your system, the more work it will be to maintain it over the long haul. If you're in for that, good on you, but I just know myself and that will not work for me. So if you're like me, grab a piece of paper or the Notes app on your phone, or grab my free classroom library organization cheat sheet, because I have decisions you'll need to make to get that classroom library into shape. These decisions come in two categories: physical organization and systems organization. Let's start with the physical organization. You need to think about how your students will search and find books. This includes specifically how your books will be organized. So let's begin there. There's 5 ways that you can organize your books, and you don't have to commit to just one way. You can do some mixing and matching, but let's talk about each one first. You can organize by genre. This is great for students to learn about genre, recognize the different genres, and learn what kinds of genres they like. It's easy for selection, especially for older students. It can be a good intro for primary, but I don't like it as the main organization system for primary students. It's possible to do and do well, but it takes a lot of training. You can organize by author. This is great for fiction books and great for older students, and it can be good for primary students as well. It's not my favorite for primary, but it can work. It's like the classroom library, kind of mirrors a regular library like in your school library or the public library. If you want to organize that way, that's certainly very doable and a good way to go. You can organize by level. Now, this is the most common in elementary classrooms. For me, it's okay, but I think it inhibits students in finding what they love and stretching themselves to try some new things. I think it's very limiting. It's not my favorite organization. I get why a lot of teachers do this, but for me and my students, it's not my favorite. You'll have to decide if this is how you want to organize your books, though. If you really are focused on students reading at their level, this might work for you. You can organize by series. This is great for Magic Tree House, Harry Potter, Fly Guy, all kinds of different series that kids get involved in because it's easy to go and find the next book when they're done, and it keeps them going and keeps them reading and engaged. I think of this as an add-on category. It's not your main category because not every book is part of a series. And the last way is by topic. Now, this is perfect for nonfiction, but it can also be perfect for primary students. I don't think that this is necessarily the best way to go for upper elementary, but for primary grades, I think it's fabulous. So in my classroom, let me tell you what I do. I organize by topic. We also have a few genre categories. There are specific genres that we talk about and discuss throughout the school year so that students get used to that idea of looking at genre in books as well. In addition, I have a few bins that are organized by series of books because there are some popular series that kids like, and if they're into a series, I want them to keep on going. And the last piece fits into that series category, and it's by author. I have some groups of books that are by author, like Eric Carle books, so things that kids would get very involved in, Mo Willems, so that students who have a love for a particular author can go in and quickly find another book by the same author. Okay, so your next decision is book bins and labels. How will you label your book bins and or your books? How will you do that? What will that look like? So the first thing you need to decide is the type of bin that you'll have in order for you to decide what kind of label you'll have, because the size of the bin changes how much information can be on that label. So when you start thinking about the type of bin that you want, yes, you want to think about how you want your classroom library to look. And I'm all about aesthetics, I am. But we need to think about how much room do you have in your classroom library? One, how many shelves do you have? What kind of shelf space do you have? And then you need to think about the amount and variety of books that you have. And the last thing you need to think about is how are you categorizing your books? So when you have those 3 things, then you can determine what kind of book bins you'll use. Will you use a skinnier book bin or a wider book bin? Are you going to use a few categories and big bins, or are you going to use smaller categories and skinnier bins? All of these will change depending on all of the decisions that you've made prior to this. Organizing by genre will give you fewer book bins than organizing by topic. So each decision you make ties into the next decision. So you'll need to take a look at what kind of space you have, how many books and the variety of books that you have, and how you plan on categorizing your books. Once you've done that, then you can decide on what type of bin that you're going to use. I love big wide bins and I think they're wonderful. Unfortunately, sometimes they don't work in your classroom library. If you're going to have lots of different categories, you might need skinnier bins. Are you going to do a variety of wide bins and skinny bins? You can do that as well. I think sometimes we get married to everything being the exact same size. But I think if you can keep the color consistent, then that can make it all seem cohesive and not so visually distracting. All right, so now let's talk about labels. When it comes to labels, if you're in primary, I like a picture, words, and then I number my book bins. So each label will have a number on it as well. So I don't do the numbering until all the book bins and books are in the classroom library, and then I go in and I start numbering. In upper grades, you don't necessarily need a picture. You just need the words, and then I like the numbers for them as well. Here's why I like numbers. With numbers, it's really easy to reshelve the books because if your animals bin is number 1, then all the books in that bin are numbered with a number 1 and they can go back into that bin. Students can look at that and go, oh, this goes in the number 1 bin and pop it in there. Now, because I have skinnier book bins, I might have 2 different book bins that are animals book bins, and so both of them are labeled number 1. I know that sounds strange, but because I'm only numbering all the animals books number 1, they can go into either one of those book bins. It's just a way to keep expanding if I wind up with more books in that category without having to renumber. That's the physical organization of your classroom library, and now we need to talk about systems. So the first piece of systems is how will your students handle the books and the bins? Are you going to allow students to pull a bin off the shelf and search through it, or do you need to slide it out partially and look through it that way? You need to actually address this because not every student will do the same thing. It's not intuitive, and so you need to have specific rules about what it is that you will allow. You need to talk about how students will handle the books. Make sure that they understand not to overstretch the spine, all of those pieces. You might think that's a given even if you teach in an upper elementary grade, but it is not. And so you need to reteach this every single year. You need to talk about your expectations for every piece of handling the book, including whether or not your students will be using bookmarks or if you're okay with them turning the corner of the book to mark their page. Next, you need to talk about how to select books. I know you already talked to your students about selecting the just right book for them, but do you talk to them about whether or not they have to mark the spot for the book that they're pulling out to look at and check out, and so that they know right where to put it back? Or can they just pull a book from a bin, look at it, and then put it back in anywhere in that bin? If you have a preference, you'd better tell them what you want, because if you don't, it's a free-for-all. And then there's book shopping. So often we have parameters about book shopping, but we don't do a good job about being very specific. Book shopping can become a real problem if we don't train our students in how and when it's okay for them to book shop. I like assigned days for students. You can do assigned days and times. If you choose not to assign days and times, how will you make sure that all students get a fair chance to shop for books? How many students are allowed to book shop at one time? You need to be specific about that as well. I like to have a timer for students to use when they book shop. Maybe your students get 10 minutes to book shop. You can have a 10-minute timer. The reason I like a timer is book shopping doesn't become an all-day affair and they don't spend their entire reading time shopping for books, because that happens. I see it all the time in classrooms where students spend all their time shopping for books and never actually reading. With my students, I like to let them know that if they finish shopping for books before their timer's rung, if they want to, they can hang out in the classroom library and look at their books until their time is up. If they decide they just want to go right back to their seat, that's fine. No problem. Just turn the timer off and head back to their seat. But if they want to hang out in the library for that little extra time that they have left, by all means, go right ahead. That's just a perk for being efficient. So now that you have some of the book shopping down, you need to train your students on what does book shopping actually look like. This is more than just how to select a just right book. It's the process of selecting books, from where to start to how to decide which book you want and to how many books they're allowed to take at any given time. So take a minute to decide, will you have assigned days and times for students to book shop or not? Will you have a timer or no timer? Will you have a checkout system? If yes, how will your students check out? I like to tell teachers you need to decide what your purpose is with having a checkout system. You need to have a strong purpose for that and a reason why you really want this, because it is an added layer and a different piece for you to manage. If you're going to have a checkout system, how will you track books? What will that look like? How much time will it take out of the student reading time? And who will manage it? So be very specific if you decide you're going to have a checkout system on all of these pieces. Next up is returns. How are you going to handle returns to your classroom library? You actually have two options. You can have a basket for returns, and then the classroom librarians can reshelve them once a day, once a week, however you decide. Or you can have students reshelve the books themselves during their book shopping time and then go search for new books. You'll need to decide how you're going to handle returns and make sure your students are clear. Now let's talk about that librarian job. As a classroom librarian, students will need to know what tasks they will be assigned for that job and when they're supposed to do that job. So how and when? Are they reshelving books, straightening bins, cleaning up the general library space? What exactly will your students be doing in the classroom library as their job for librarian? They are not the book police, and make sure that they know that. And then you need to decide who will be classroom librarians. How will you assign that? There needs to be a system and a process for that. I like to have 2 students at a time who are assigned to any given job, because then if one's absent, you always have a second person. Plus, it's nice to have a partner. I give them a 2-week shift, so they're on for 2 weeks as classroom librarians, so I'm not training constantly every single week. And I try to have a specified time for classroom librarians to do their job. It can be at the end of the school day, it can be before lunch, after lunch, whenever it is that you deem is the best time. This way, your classroom library is always ready to go. And then I like to have a book hospital. What is a book hospital? It's a bin or a basket that students can put books that need repair. It helps if they can put a post-it note and be specific about what they think needs repairing, but it doesn't have to happen that way. If you have young students, they can simply put the book in the bin or basket, and you know you'll have to take a look at it later on to see exactly what needs to be done. Your classroom librarians might even be able to help you with this if you train them properly. Now, the next piece is not something you have to do, but I highly recommend, and that is teacher book tracking. It is really nice to know what you have in your classroom library at any given time. I say this because how many times have you bought a book and then bought another copy, not realizing you already had that book in your classroom library? It's really great to have a list of everything that's in your classroom library. And when books get worn out and you remove them from a classroom library because they're literally just falling apart, then you know what you need to replace as well. Tracking books helps maintain a good variety of books and a good amount of each level of book in your classroom library. Now, this can seem a little overwhelming. Now, to begin with, if you're just starting out, it can be. You can use a spreadsheet, or you can use a scanner. There are book scanners that you can buy on Amazon that are lovely. They're not expensive, and it is a quick way for you to be able to catalog the books. There's a site that you can log into, and then you scan the books and it organizes the books in there. It makes it easy for you to sort through and manage the books without having to type in every single book name yourself. If you have already started some sort of a spreadsheet, by all means, keep using your spreadsheet. If you already have it mostly done, just go with it. There's no reason to invest in a different system. However, if you haven't started that yet and you do want to start keeping track, a scanner is a good way to start out. Now, I have a classroom library organization cheat sheet for you. You can grab that in the show notes, and I will put a link to the book scanner and some book bins as well. So that's it for this episode of the Teach Joyfully podcast, my teacher friends. My sincere thanks to you, my listeners, for tuning in, and for all those of you who've taken the time to post a review. Email me your thoughts or DM me on Instagram with your feedback and topic requests. You can find the show notes and all the resources mentioned in the episode on my website at www.hopeineducation.com/podcast. And remember, A happy teacher is a good teacher. Until next time, teach joyfully and take care of you.